Web Summit, Qatar, in association with CNBC TV 18.
We're here at the Web Summit in Qatar, and it's all about AI and innovation. And right now I have with me Trevor Martin of Mammoth Biosciences, and he's here to explain to us what it is the company does. But hi, thank you so much for joining us here at the CNBC TV 18 studio.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Are you having a good time at the Web Summit? What's the mood like out here after you've come?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think there's a lot of excitement about the future, and I think especially uniquely here, excitement about how that can go beyond the United States and really, especially the Middle East.
Yeah, and there's this big emphasis on AI and innovation, right? So if you could sort of explain to us what it is that you do at Mammoth Biosciences, what are you creating?
Yeah, so at Mammoth, fundamentally, we're curing genetic diseases. And this is something that's been kind of the holy grail of biomedicine for decades.
Right.
Things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Huntington's. We've known that these are genetic diseases for decades, for half a century for some of them, yet there's nothing we've been able to do about it. And that's what we're trying to change at Mammoth.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's gene editing what you're trying to do, right? So if you could sort of tell us how far have you come in sort of being able to, cure these diseases? What's the latest, development on that front?
Yeah, so it's really exciting. It's very much science fiction, but it's becoming science reality, I guess you could say. So taking a step back, when we say gene editing, so what we do at Mammoth is we use this technology called CRISPR.
Right.
And you might have heard of CRISPR because it won the Nobel Prize a few years ago.
Right.
And we co-founded Mammoth with Jennifer Doudna, who won the Nobel Prize, to commercialize this technology and use this essentially kind of tiny molecular machine to go into cells that make up our body and to actually change the DNA. So if you think of your DNA as this giant Word document that has billions of letters, and actually it's a very simple Word document in some ways because it only has A, T, C's, and G's. These are like the letters of life, basically. Okay. And sometimes there's a sentence that's wrong, or maybe there's a word that's misspelled, or there's a paragraph that's missing. And CRISPR basically allows you to go in and add that paragraph or spell correct that word. And that's a thing that hasn't been really possible to do previously, and that's a very exciting development for us to be able to actually go in and change the DNA to actually cure diseases.
So how close are we to curing these diseases, though? What are the tests that have happened so far to, tell us how close we are to being able to solve this issue?
Yeah, so what's exciting is actually already there's an approved therapy using CRISPR in the United States for a blood disorder called sickle cell disease. And this is one where you can actually edit the blood cells. Right. And that's really exciting because that shows that there's already patients that are getting the advantage of this curative style of therapy. I think the next stage, though, is how do we go beyond the blood? Correct. How do we go into all these other tissues that make up the body, like the muscle and the brain and the heart? And that's what we've really been pioneering at Mammoth, is how do we go to any cell in the body and make any kind of edit so we can actually tackle every genetic disease. Right.
And, if you could give us some use cases of what every genetic, disease would be, like what are y'all aiming at curing at this point?
Yeah, so we have a platform. So what's exciting about CRISPR that's very different from what's come before it in the biotech space is that it used to be every time you go after a disease, you kind of have to start from square one when you go after the next one. And it's very expensive, it's very painful. Yeah. And the beauty of CRISPR is that you can reprogram it. Very similar to how you kind of go onto Google and you can do a search for many different things using the same platform. You can reprogram CRISPR to go after pretty much any genetic disease. Okay. And that means that the first therapy is the hardest one to build, and then the second one's easier, the third one's easier, the fourth one's easier. And that's a very different modality from anything else that's come in biotech before. So on that front, we're really excited, especially about going to areas like the muscle and the brain and these disorders that everyone thinks of when you think of genetic diseases, right? Like, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, et cetera. And I think that's where there's really high unmet need.
So there's a lot of, unmet need there, especially, and even if we look at the healthcare sector at large, right, there are so many unmet needs, and everybody talks about how AI and technology can actually help the sector so much. So where do you see AI helping healthcare? What is the future that you see for healthcare with AI?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of facets where it helps. So first and foremost, obviously, we use it to find and characterize and better develop these CRISPR technologies themselves, right? That's maybe one of the more obvious use cases that's really exciting because it really does mean that you can empower the scientists to move much more quickly than they would be otherwise. And I'll give a specific example. So when we find and develop these new CRISPR technologies, often you have to go through this process of actually crystallizing it so you can see the structure. Right. But using different AI techniques, you can actually kind of fold those proteins without actually having to go make the crystal structure. Okay. And that means that you can actually make lots more scientific progress very quickly. On the other end of the spectrum, I think it's also really exciting. How do we find and characterize new genetic diseases? So right now, we really think a lot about what are called Mendelian genetic diseases. So these diseases where a single gene very clearly causes it. But there's lots of diseases where maybe there's multiple genes that are causing risk. Let's say like type 2 diabetes. And maybe AI can help us deconvolute what are the parts of the genome that are actually causing it, so then we can use CRISPR to go and cure it.
Okay. And, when we talk about AI and we talk about all of these things that it can do in terms of data, isn't there a worry or a challenge of, data getting leaked or privacy or security, especially when you're working on, things like genes and all of that? So what do you believe should be like some of the guardrails that need to be up to sort of protect data and protect security and protect people against this?
Absolutely. And I think at the end of the day, it's the patient should be in charge. And well, two things. The patient should both be in charge of and know what's happening with their data. And I think that requires a lot of different, the government, healthcare providers, like obviously, insurance companies, and of course, biotech industry in general. So that's takes a village type of goal, but I think that's what it has to be, because that's what engenders trust in the system as well. You want people to actually be willing to share their genetic data so you can actually do all these exciting things.
So responsible usage of the information that's being shared by all parties at this point, right? Until like certain regulations or guardrails are up. But if you could, talk to us about, what are the kind of partnerships that you've entered into while you've been like trying to do this gene editing, and how many of these partnerships have you been able to grow, and who will be your clientele going forward,
Yeah, we're very, very fortunate to work with really great companies in the biotech space to help develop these types of therapies together as well. So we have our own programs that we're working on and we'll bring to market. But some examples are we're really fortunate to work with Regeneron, with Vertex, with Bayer. These are leaders in their respective areas. And that's one of the great things about biotech, is that there are these opportunities to work together. And in fact, that's how you get patients to get therapies to patients much more quickly. So for example, the most recent partnership we did was with Regeneron, where we're kind of combining our CRISPR expertise with their knowledge of delivery and disease. And that's going to allow us to much more quickly kind of bring these very, very exciting technologies to really high unmet patient need, where patients need it yesterday.
And right now you're working in the US, but what are the countries you're hoping to reach? Is India on the radar? Or which are the countries you're hoping to expand into to be able to, sort of do this research and build more partnerships?
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that's a big thing that we're thinking about a lot, and I think that has been overlooked in the space generally, because obviously there's an economics component to this, where the United States, for various reasons, is really where therapies are going to be able to reach a certain price point and actually give you the return on investment that these types of kind of frontier technologies require. But genetic disease is present across the world, right? And especially as these technologies develop and as we can bring the cost down over time, I think there's both a moral imperative, but also a business imperative to bring these around the world, and to India, to the Middle East, to other areas. And I think to that point as well, there's many genetic diseases that are not found as much in the United States, but are incredibly prevalent in India, in the Middle East. And I think there's a huge opportunity for Mammoth to work with these areas and these countries to really make sure that we're building genetic medicines for these diseases that would be overlooked otherwise.
So it is something that you guys are working on. And like you said, there's an economics to it, but also what you pointed out was that you need heavy investment into these things to be able to bring them to the world, in the US, anywhere, right? So what's the, fundraising plan for you guys? Are you all well capitalized right now? So what's the investment plan?
Yeah, so we're very fortunate to be well capitalized. I think that that's a bit combination of, very long-term thinking from investors, and of course working with our partners as well. In general, though, bringing therapies to market takes billions of dollars, right? So we'll have to continue to raise money over time. But I think the great thing is that as these technologies are progressing, the science is really showing not just huge amounts of promise, but huge amounts of results. And especially in biotech, that's the great thing, is you can rely on data. So as those kind of data readouts keep coming, I think that we'll raise money at the appropriate times. And what's really exciting, though, is that CRISPR is this unique technology where the first therapies are the hardest ones to build, and they really do get kind of easier over time. And that means there's a unique kind of investment thesis where you don't have to keep investing the same amount over and over again to every different drug. And that means that there is an opportunity to build a long-term biotech leader. So we're really looking to build over the next 10, 20 years, a company that's not, $1 billion, $10 billion market cap, but $100 billion market cap. And that's a very unique opportunity that doesn't come along in biotech as often as other fields.
And by your guesstimate, how soon will we see it in the market?
Yeah, so I think that we already have one therapy that's from a company called CRISPR Therapeutics that's approved in the US for sickle cell disease. And I think over the next 5-10 years, what's exciting is you're going to see tons of diseases with CRISPR therapies on the market. And we're just going to start knocking off these different diseases one by one. And that's something where, it happens slowly at first, but then it happens very quickly. And I think that's something that people aren't used to in biotech. People are used to it happens slowly and then it happens slowly again and then slowly again. And I think that's something that's really exciting. And I think that people are going to be very surprised in the next 5 to 10 years how many diseases actually have permanent cures available.
So the 5-year growth roadmap for Mammoth Biosciences?
Yeah, so for us, we're really focused on getting our first therapies into the clinic, getting our first therapies onto the market, and then building on that tissue by tissue and really just knocking out as many diseases as possible and working on lots of diseases in parallel.
All right, Trevor, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. And it's been great having a chat with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Web Summit Qatar, in association with CNBC TV 18.